economic equity. Toby Shapshak, editor-in-chief of Stuff magazine, joins us now to unpack how this Starlink development could set a precedent for tech regulation in South Africa. Toby, thanks for your time. Just give us your reaction to the announcement that Starlink may be on our shores sooner rather than later.
Well, firstly, hello. It's an interesting thing that I feel like I'm being squeezed in between Julius Malema speech in the Free State.
Might be a little strategic.
Called him, Johan Rupert called him the rebel rouser. We added in chief. So interesting to see him continuing to rabble rouse. What's happened is a very interesting shift of policy. So just to explain things, BEE requirements generally require if a foreign company can't sell a percentage of their local subsidiary or their local company, such as Microsoft or Google or Ford or BMW or Toyota, they have what are called equity equivalent investment options. So, the motor industry started a fund that employs businesses in that industry and supports small businesses, or you build some infrastructure or you pay for some training. These have been the traditional workarounds for big tech firms. When it comes to telecoms and broadcasting, it's very different. The regulations and the laws that govern ICASA in terms of the telecoms industry and ICASA in terms of broadcast very clearly insists that the ownership portion of BEE regulations has to be fulfilled. So the company has to be 30% owned by previously disadvantaged people. What Communication Minister Solly Malatsi has done is suggest to ICASA that in line with a broader understanding of this, I'm just explaining the background, which is called the BE or B-BBEE ICT sector code, that ICASA is being directed by the political principle to look at this legislation for the broader tech industry, and instead of having to have ownership, they could do these equity equivalent investment programs, as Malatsi called it in the Government Gazette notice on Friday. So basically, it's a bit of common sense is coming through. You have two very competitive parts of our economy and of very high very high cost industries in terms of telecoms and broadcast. And what's happened globally is that these big businesses are consolidating and competing increasingly against everyone. So, if you're competing against a telco, say Vodacom, they're actually owned by Vodafone. At one point, the largest telecoms company in the world. I think they down the ladder a little bit. But, all of a sudden, it makes a big difference for a company like MultiChoice, which is, competing against Netflix and Amazon Prime when it comes to its Showmax, Disney Plus, HBO, for it to partner with Canal Plus is a strategic advantage for an own-grown, self-made South African company like MultiChoice. I think it's a good move, and the same thing for bringing in an international service provider. No, big tech firm is going to sell 30% of their subsidiary to take on the South African market. In global terms, South Africa is tiny. We're at often a rounding error for these big companies. We think we're really important, and obviously we are. Don't question our exceptionalism. And I think part of the reason that Cyril Ramaphosa has suddenly got all of South Africa's backing is because if you're going to trash talk our country, that's our job, so we stand behind him, it's our job. I often joke only Jews can tell Jewish jokes, or other Jews joke that, so it's been a good thing for us in terms of our country. I think this White House meeting, so Ramaphosa brought his bomb squad, and look at how well they played, mostly Afrikaners as it happened.
Now, one of the things that there's obviously some reaction from local telecoms and tech players that you're going to speak to us about. But I'd also like to touch on something that Julius Malema spoke about in this address and copies minutes ago. And he talked about just how important it is for young people across the length and breadth of South Africa, in fact, in rural South Africa. And he says it's is not a favour to them, but it's almost obligatory that there should be internet access in the most remote parts of the country. And Starlink will potentially be able to deliver that service.
Yes, Hugo, I don't know if you're asking me to agree with Julius Malema, but the point he made is the point that has been made by lots of people for a long time, and that if you want the youth of today to become the entrepreneurs of tomorrow, their internet experience should rather be about what can you do on the internet as opposed to spending all of your time and energy trying to find data or free Wi-Fi to get on the internet. You know, there was a brilliant period in the American economy in the early 2000s where these big businesses built these massive fiber networks, WorldCom and a couple of others, and then they went belly up and they went bankrupt and they converted $200 billion worth of assets into 200 million. So in effect, what that bursting bubble did was give America massive infrastructure, which was subsidized basically by shareholders who believed these companies' plans that they would connect the world. Of course, that level of technology has been surpassed, but it gave the teenagers of America this massive opportunity to use internet everywhere you go. Whenever you travel in the States, there's free Wi-Fi in the airport, in a hotel, in a shopping mall. It's a massive enabler. So these young kids would go and they'd sit there and they'd work out, hey, I want to work out how to post pictures to the internet, and they'd come up with Instagram, or I want to post videos to the internet, and they'd come up with YouTube. That, you know, those are very simplistic examples. South Africa, or Africa especially, has proved how useful mobile money has been. So as soon as you have connectivity, you have a mobile device, you have connectivity, then you have different levels of innovation where people start thinking of what can we do on top of that? How can we do this? If everyone has internet access, how can we go? Solly Malatsi quotes the very famous World Bank statistic, which I've been quoting myself for years and years. For every 10% of broadband penetration, an economy will get a 1% increase in GDP. And they were quite specific, the Department of Communications, to say 1.21 or 24% for a middle income country like South Africa. And when you look at how little internet connectivity there is in rural areas, it makes something like Starlink seem like a fantastic idea, because it is. So the costs are, it used to be $600 for a base station. It's been brought down to $400 because that's what Amazon's Caper network does. I have a neighbor who lives in Zimbabwe. His wife and family live in Zimbabwe. And he bought Starlink, and it costs $200 a month. That's the only connectivity he can find. I've tried to help him with bigger boosters and aerials and other things. And in the end, he's getting the connectivity from space. $200 is not nothing. It's very expensive when you look at it, but it's connectivity, and there's no other way to get connectivity, and it's a price he's willing to pay for. I know a friend who's a farmer in Pietermaritzburg. He's desperate for Starlink. They just can't get good connectivity. I used to live in a suburb in Johannesburg called Parkhurst that was infamous for having very poor, may still be the case, very poor cellular signal, despite being, you know, a very, very well-heeled suburb. So it's not just the rural areas. There are lots of places, and if you can afford it, or if you want it, then the use case is fantastic. So I'm pleased to see that it's there. Elon Musk has become a somewhat controversial figure, hasn't he? I'm not so sure we're proud to claim him as a South African as much as we used to before that, but the service he provides will do a lot of good for a lot of people. And as Johan Rupert said, Hugo, we need a Starlink in every police station. Imagine how it would improve the ability of government to deliver services to customers, home affairs, relief payments, all of the things that are so necessary for a country to function, that in many more mature democracies have gone online, just aren't online. Home affairs, police services, getting a new passport or a birth certificate.
So, Toby, you're raising some positive issues around those that are proponents of Starlink. So let's talk about the naysayers. those that are impacted or would imagine that they're going to lose business, what are they saying?
So there's obviously some pushback from other players in the industry. I haven't read anything over the weekend, so I haven't seen if anyone said something. But I don't think the government would have gone through a process like this without engaging with the stakeholders, as government officials like to call big industry players and bodies. They would have discussed this with them. Solly Malatsi is a kind of very clear thinker. You know, he's a next generation politician. He's inclusive. He goes and he speaks to people, and this is being done with the best interest in mind. I've seen a lot of members of the ANC committee, the telecoms committee, or whichever committee oversees the sector, being very up in arms about it. Well, you know, suggest an alternative. You know, what we're looking for is the way to solve a problem. Don't demand that the problem be solved because the legislation's 30 years out of date and the competition is so fierce. Even though South Africa has a universal service agency, a USA, of its own, it's unable to provide connectivity in rural areas. And if this can do the job, this can do the job. You know, let's find equivalents if those are or that process is what is needed, which clearly the communication minister thinks, and let's find another way. So, you know, there is a lot of political pushback. How much of it is legitimate and how much of it is, you know, pushback every time a DA minister in the GNU does something that, you know, the ANC ministers or the ANC caucus doesn't like? It's kind of weird knee-jerk reaction every time a DA cabinet minister does something that everybody else goes, wow, that's wonderful. The ANC starts sending messages saying we've been outperformed and criticizing them in public. You know, be constructive, people. If people have another suggestion to get rural connectivity, we'd love to know.
Mm. And final thoughts, how will the ICASA and Parliament oversee or limit such exemptions in the future?
I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, ICASA could just go, thanks, and carry on functioning. I don't think that'll happen. I think ICASA will go, thank you. This is a legal workaround to a conflict that there happens to exist in the country in terms of ownership for these big telcos or big broadcasters. MultiChoice has found a clever way around that, I think, and you know, we just need to be conscious that we live in a very different world to when all of this legislation was created 30 or 25 years ago, and that the world has changed significantly. And there are big companies in the world who just are not going to give up a 30% shareholding of a subsidiary in a market that's tiny to them and could be just a rounding error on their balance sheet, but they will invest in our country if they can put back something into the country in another way. I think that's a more reasonable approach to it.
Toby Shapshak, Editor-in-Chief of Stuff magazine. Appreciate your time and certainly those perspectives around Elon Musk's Starlink.